Another fundamental and super important aspect of JavaScript are arrays and how we can work with them. So let me now quickly show you the fundamentals of doing that. But before, I will again comment out this code here. So now we don't need any of the code we wrote before. All right, and now let's talk about arrays. So arrays is basically another type of value which aggregates many other values. So an array is basically like an even bigger box into which we can place many smaller boxes, which are values or variables. So let me just show you what I mean. And for that, we are going to create an array for a fact. So I will simply call it fact, and then we open these square brackets. And now in this array, we can place as many values as we want. So I will start with the text of the fact. So using the same as before, Lisbon is the capital of Portugal. Next up, we can do maybe the year in which the fact was created. So let's say 2015, and then also whether the fact is correct or not. So let's simply say true. So going back to the analogy that a variable is a box, then an array is like a shelf onto which you can place multiple boxes, one after another. And so each of these boxes is, well, one of these values here. So you first have this value, then you have another one, and notice how it's a completely different type. So we have a string, then we have a number, then we have a Boolean. And so that means that in arrays, we can mix whatever data types we want all into the same array. So the array basically aggregates all this data into one big value. So that's this value, which, as always, we then store into the fact variable. So let's quickly check out what that looks like in the console, just for fun. And so here it is. So that's our array. Now, in order to get some data out of the array, we can simply do this. So we write the fact, and then we use square brackets, and then the index number. So in an array, this first element is the element number 0, the second is number 1, and the third is number 2. So basically, arrays have 0-based indexes. So if I write fact 0, we get the very first element. And if I write fact 2, then we get the third. Right? And if I go over the size of the array, then we get dead and defined. So remember how we talked about how undefined is one of the data types in JavaScript. And so here we are seeing that for the first time. Okay, but let's just leave it at something else. And another thing we can do with arrays is to get their length. So we can do fact dot length. And so then we get 3. And so this one is no longer 0-based. So basically 3 is really the number of elements in the array. So we can actually use this data here to get the very last element of an array. So automatically, because sometimes we do not know the length of an array. So how can we do that? So we can do fact, and then here inside these brackets, just like many times before, JavaScript simply expects a value, but it doesn't care how that value is generated. So we can do fact dot length minus 1. So minus 1 because the last element is actually number 2, right? And so we get true. And if we now edit something here, then here we would get something because the length is now 4 and 4 minus 1 is 3. And so 0, 1, 2, 3 is something, right? And so here, this works no matter if we know the length of the array or not. So these are the very, very basics of arrays. Where they become really, really powerful is when we use some methods on them. So when we call functions on the arrays, just like we did before with the strings. And we will do that in the next lecture. But for now, let me show you some other fundamental things that we do all the times with arrays. So what's very common is to create variables from the array. So let's imagine that we get this array from somewhere. So for example, some function returned this array to us, and then we want to create some variables based on that data. So we can do this. So basically creating multiple variables at the same time by writing the square brackets, and then let's say text, then created in, and then is correct. So that's basically the order of the data that we have in the array. So this one here will be the text, then the second one, so this one will become created in, and the third one will become true. So here we are creating these three variables all at the same time. But where does the data actually come from? So we need to tell JavaScript where to read this from, and it is from text, or actually from fact, of course. Okay, and now we can just make sure that it is correct by logging these variables to the console. So indeed, Lisbon is the capital of Portugal, which is the very first element of the array. And let's just do another one, and that's 2015. So of course, this worked. So this technique is called destructuring, and we do it really all the time. Now we could also just take the first or only the first two values. So we could simply write this, and then of course, here we are now trying to read a value or a variable that doesn't exist. So we get this error there. Okay, and so here we get Lisbon is the capital of Portugal, which is simply the very first value there. But of course we can also, as we did before, get some more values. So let's say we are interested only in the first two, and then we can ignore the third one. Now another common operation is to add elements to an array by creating a new array, so without changing the old one. That's something really important. Now you might think that it works like this. So let's say new fact, then we can create a new array and place the first one in there, and then let's add the category. So you might think that this is how we create a new array which contains this array and this new string. But let's see what we actually get. New fact. And so, well, just as we specified here, we get an array with two elements. The first element is the original array, and the second element is just that new element that we wanted to add to the initial one. So here we can see that even better. So this old array plus this new thing. But that's not really what we wanted. We wanted a new array with 4 elements, which contains all of these 4 things all in one. So instead, what we do is to basically take all the elements out of the original array and then place them immediately back into the new array. And that's an operation that we call spreading, and it works like this. So let me save it, and then I will explain better what happened here. So now indeed we get an array with these 4 elements. And so what happened here with these 3 dots is that we basically unpacked the previous array, so the fact array. So basically we took all of the values, so it's like we copied the values from here and placed them there. So again, these 3 dots, which are called the spread operator, they unpack the entire original array and place the values here. And so then we have the values in the array, and then we can just write some more elements to add them to those values as well. And we could also add them to the end of the array. So placing society here first, and then like this. And so then society would be added to the beginning of the new array. Okay, but let's actually reverse that and keep it like this. Now just keep in mind that we can only do this operation inside of arrays. So only there it makes sense to do this. Okay, so creating new arrays, getting data from arrays like here, creating variables from data in arrays, and also adding new data to arrays are some of the most fundamental and basic operations we perform on arrays. Another extremely common operation is looping over arrays. And so there's a special lecture about that a little bit later in this section.